Overlord Volume 4 Chapter 1 Departure Part 1 The Azalisian mountain range lay between the Baharuth Empire and the Riestai's kingdom. Its southern foothills were surrounded by a sprawling forest, the Great Forest of Taub, and there was a huge lake at its northern edge. This lake was over 20 square kilometers in size and resembled an inverted gourd. It was divided into the upper lake and the lower lake. The upper lake was very deep and was home to larger creatures, while the lower lake was where the smaller creatures lived. The southern end of the lower lake was surrounded by wetlands, and countless structures had been erected in this large, marshy region. Each of these houses was built in the marsh and supported by about 10 stilts each. Among the many stilt houses, one of them had its doors open, its owner revealed to all under the golden rays of the sun. He was a member of the demi-human race known as lizard men. Diamond suit lizard men resembled a cross between humans and reptiles. To be precise, lizard men had human-like hands and feet, and were essentially bipedal lizards, although their heads bore no resemblance to those of humans at all. As demi-humans, along with such races as goblins and ogres, they were easily dismissed as savages, due to a lack of technology and the way of life which subsequently resulted. However, they still had a civilization of their own, though it was not very advanced. Mature male lizard men averaged around 190 centimeters tall and weighed over 100 kilograms. Their body mass was not composed of fat, but of bulging muscles, which contributed to an impressive and imposing physique. Reptilian tails sprouted from their waists, which they used to maintain their balance. Their feet were large with webbed toes, optimized for movement in water and marshlands. Therefore, they were not as adept at overland movement, but it did not pose a problem for them given their living environment. Their bodies were covered in scales, whose colors ranged from a dirty-looking green to gray to black. Instead of lizard-like skin, they had tough hides which resembled those of crocodiles, which protected better than lower-end human armor. They had 5-fingered hands, like those of humans, and each finger was tipped with a short claw. The weapons they used were quite primitive, because they had never had the chance to mine and refine ores for armaments. Thus, their most commonly used weapons were spears made from the fangs and claws of monsters, as well as stone-headed clubs. Diamond suit the blinding sun hung high in the azure sky, with only a few ephemeral clouds to interrupt the endless expanse of blue. The weather was very good, and one could clearly see the towering peaks in the distance. This lizard man had a broad field of vision, and he could see the blazing sun above even without turning his head. Zariusa glanced downward briefly, and then descended the stairs at a steady pace. Zariusa clutched at the brand on his black-scaled chest. That brand represented his position in the tribe. Lizardman tribes were a strictly ordered society, and the highest authority among them was the tribe's chief. The position was not hereditary, it was awarded to the strongest person within the tribe. Every year, they would conduct a ceremony to select a new tribal chief. In addition, there was a council of elders who would advise the chief, composed of the eldest members of the community. Below them were the warrior lizard men, the regular lizard men, the lizard women, and the juvenile lizard men. Together they comprised Lizardman society. Of course, there were some lizard men who stood outside this hierarchy. First, there were the priests, more of druids, actually, who predicted upcoming danger by forecasting the weather or aiding the tribe with curative magic. Then, there were the rangers, who formed hunting parties. Their main task was to catch fish, but the regular lizard men would help in that task as well. Thus, their most important job was their activities in the forest. Lizard men were omnivorous, but their main diet was a kind of fish, which was around 80 centimeters long, and they disliked vegetables and fruits. Even so, the hunters still had to enter the forest for logging purposes. The land was not safe for lizard men, thus specialists were needed when they went to fell trees. While they could move as they pleased and make their own decisions, they were ultimately subject to the tribal chief's authority. Lizardman society was patrilineal, with clearly defined rules and responsibilities for its members. And yet, there were some who were outside the tribal chief's authority. Those would be the travelers. One might think of foreigners when one heard the word travelers. However, that was impossible. Lizardman society was fundamentally a closed one, and it did not admit anyone outside the tribe. That being the case, what were these travelers? They were lizardmen who wanted to explore the world. Fundamentally speaking, lizardmen would not leave their birthplaces unless it was a matter of life and death, for instance, when prey had run out, or a similarly dire emergency. Still, there were a rare few lizard men who thirsted for the chance to see the outside world. When a traveler decided to leave his tribe, he would receive a special brand upon his chest. It represented his departure from the tribe, and its authority. Often, those who left to travel the outside world did not return. Sometimes they died far from their homes, sometimes they found a place to stay in the wide new world they had discovered, and so on. However, a rare few did come home after taking their fill of the world. Those travelers who returned to their hometowns were highly acclaimed for the knowledge of the outside world which they brought back with them. They might have been outsiders who had evaded the chief's authority, but in an instant they could become local celebrities. In fact, there were some villagers who kept a respectful distance from Zariusu, but for the most part the others viewed him with awestruck eyes. However, that was not just because he was a traveler. There was another reason for their admiring gazes. As he stepped onto the marsh from the stairs, his favored weapon clattered at his waist as it touched his scales. That weapon had a pale, razor-sharp edge and emitted a dull glow. It was bizarrely shaped, resembling a sai whose blade and grip blended into one, but the blade grew thinner the further it went from the hilt, until it was paper-thin at its tip. There was no lizard man who did not know of this weapon. It was one of the magic items regarded as the four great treasures of the surrounding lizardman tribes, Frostpain. The fact that he possessed that weapon was a major source of Zarius's fame. Zarius strode forth. He had two destinations in mind. On his back was a present which he would take to one of those places. That present was 4 fish, each of which was 1 meter long. He carried them on his back as he strode on, and their odor did not repulse him, but instead tantalized him. How I'd like to eat these fish, Zariusu had to cast that desire aside, while sighing several times as he splashed through the shallow water towards the Green Claw village. The children, whose green scales were still bright and shiny, giggled and laughed as they ran around Zariusu, but they ground to a halt once they saw the big fish on his back. He could see growing kids with their ravenous appetites peering at him from the gaps between the houses, their eyes focused on Zariusu, no, on the fish he carried. Almost all of them had their mouths slightly agape, most likely drooling in anticipation. Even as he drew away from them, their eyes were still glued to him. Those were the eyes of children begging for snacks. Zarius smiled bitterly at this and pretended that he had not noticed. Instead, he continued on. He had already decided who would receive this present, but unfortunately it would not be these children. The fact that the glow in the children's eyes was not entirely due to hunger pleased Zariusu, because it was a sight which would have been unimaginable several years ago. After leaving those longing looks behind him, Zariusu passed several houses along the way before he found the dwelling that was his destination. He was now at the outskirts of the village, and if he carried on any further, he would no longer be in the marsh, but in a fairly deep part of the lake. The houses built on this subtle dividing line seemed quite sturdy in appearance, and were larger than Zarius's own. The odd thing was that the house was slightly tilted, so half of it was submerged in the water. However, this was by design, and not by some external force. Zariusu approached the house, splashing loudly as he went. As he came close, a playful cry came from within. Perhaps its occupant had scented something. A serpentine head poked out of what should have been a window. It was a snake with deep brown scales and amber eyes. When it spotted Zariusu, it stretched its neck out and coiled playfully around him. "That's a good boy." Zariusu caressed the snake's body in a familiar way. The snake seemed to find it very comfortable, and closed its eyes, both its eyelids and its nictitating membranes. Zariusu too enjoyed the feeling of the scales under his fingers. This creature was Zarius's pet, Rororo. He had raised Rororo from a young age, so it seemed as though it was actually carrying on a conversation with its owner. "Rororo, I've brought food for you." Eat it slowly and don't fight over it. Zariusu tossed the fish into the house through the window, and soft thuds came from within. I wanted to play with you, but I have to go check on the fish now, so maybe later. Perhaps the snake understood what its owner was saying, but it reluctantly nuzzled against Zariusu's body several times before returning to the house. Soon, the sound of tearing flesh and vigorous chewing reached him. The way Rororo ripped into his food suggested that he was in good shape, and so Zariusu was relieved as he left the little house behind him. Diamond suit, diamond suit, diamond suit. After that, Zariusu's destination was the lakeside some distance from the village. His feet slapped against the ground as he walked into the forest. While swimming would have been faster, Zariusu had a habit of checking his surroundings to see if anything was going on while he was moving on land. However, given that visibility was very poor in the forest, staying alert took a mental toll even on someone like Zariusu. Before long, he saw his destination through the trees. The fact that nothing had happened filled Zariusu with a sense of relief. Zariusu quickened his pace through the forest now that he was close. After dodging one branch after another, Zariusu emerged from the woods. It was then that his eyes went wide. That was because he saw someone surprising before him. That someone was a black lizard man who looked very similar to Zariusu. "Anija, it's you." The black lizard man turned to regard Zariusu with a keen gaze. This lizard man was the chief of the Green Claw tribe, as well as Zariusu's older brother, Shisuria Shasha. He had defended his title as chief on 2 previous occasions, and with nobody to challenge him this time round, he had retained his chief's position. His muscular body was one of staggering proportions. If one stood them side by side, Zariusu and his more balanced body type would appear smaller in comparison. An old white scar marked his black scales, like a thunderbolt arcing through storm clouds. The great sword on his back was an unadorned, heavy sword almost 2 meters long and forged of steel. It was the symbol of the chief, and it had been enchanted with spells to prevent rust and improve sharpness. Zariusu approached the lakeside and stood beside his brother. "Why did you come here?" "I should be asking you that, right, Anija? You don't need to come down in person as the tribe's chief, right?" Mew. Unable to respond to that, Shisuria grunted and turned back to the lake before him. Sturdy pillars emerged from the lake's surface, enclosing an area between them. Densely woven nets had been strung up between the pillars. Their purpose was immediately obvious. This was a fish farm. "Could it be you came here to pinch food?" Shisuria's tail sprang up in response to Zariusu's words, and it pounded the ground several times. Mew, as if. "I merely came to see how the breeding went." "Seriously, little bro. Do you think your Anija is someone like that?" After that forceful statement, Shisuria took a step forward. Though Zariusu was a hardened veteran of many battles from his time as a traveler, that looming sense of pressure, like an encroaching wall, made even someone like him want to back off. However, Zariusu now had the perfect way to respond to him. "If you were only here to see how they were growing, then that implies you don't want any." "What a shame. I was thinking of giving you a few if they had turned out well." Mew. The sound of pounding faded away, and Shisuria's tail drooped limply. "They're really delicious, you know. I gave them lots of tasty feed, and raised them up nice and fat. They're better than the ones caught in the wild. Yeah, fresh and lovely juices flow out once you bite into them. Once you actually chew off a piece, the meat practically melts on your tongue." Mo, the sound of a thumping tail rang out again, more intense than just now. Zariusu stared at his elder brother's tail, and in a playful tone he added, "Big sis always did say that your tail was too honest, Anija." "What? Damn woman, how dare she make fun of her husband like that? Besides, how is it honest?" Zariusu had no idea how to respond to his elder brother, who was staring at his own motionless tail. Eventually, he mumbled something along the lines of, "That's true. Humph, that damn woman, if you've ever been with one, you'd understand how I feel now. You know I can't get married." "Humph, what nonsense is that? You mean that brand? Who gives a damn about those elders, anyway?" Not a single female in this village would reject you if you went after them, even if she had a tail that was out of this world. The tails of lizard men were used to store nutrients. Thus, a thick tail was very appealing to members of the opposite sex. Zaryusa would have preferred large-tailed females in his youth, but after growing up and seeing the world, he chose to avoid them as much as possible. Given the current state of the village, I'm not into females with thick tails. If I had to go by tails, I'd rather have one with a slimmer tail. Personally, I think someone like Big Sis would be all right. Well, you would think that way, given your personality. But honestly, you shouldn't bed females like that. You might get hurt. You should go learn how bad marriage is as well. It's unfair that I'm the only one who has to go through such suffering. Oi, Anija, if you're not careful, Big Sis will find out about this. Mew, see? That's part of why marriage is bad. People like you can threaten me, someone who's your big brother and your chief. Cheerful laughter pealed out over the quiet lake. After Shisuria calmed down from his mirth, he studied the fish farm before him once more. As a complex mix of emotions played through his heart, he murmured in awe, "Still, you've really done some outstanding work here with this." Sensing his older brother's loss for words, the younger brother gave him a helping hand. The fish farm? Yes, that's it. Nobody's done this before in our tribe, and now everyone knows that raising fish is a workable plan. If this keeps up, a lot of people will begin imitating us in envy. That's all thanks to you, Anija. I know you've been selling the idea to everyone. Zaryusu, what good would it do to just spread the word? It'd be nothing more than idle chatter. What really counted was your hard work in breeding all those delicious fish from this farm. Of course, he had failed many times when he had first begun setting up the fish farm. After all, it was merely an idea he had after being inspired by what he had seen and heard of in his travels. Even the surrounding net had broken down countless times, and it had taken a full year of trial and error before he could build a functioning fish farm. And yet, things had not ended there. The fish had to be tended, and they had to be fed. He had tossed in all sorts of feed to see which would be most effective, and as a result he had killed all the fish in the farm more than once. There had even been cases where monsters had broken down the net penning in the fish, sending him back to square one. People had pointed and whispered behind his back about how he was using caught fish as toys, and some had even gone and called him an idiot to his face. However, his hard work had now borne fruit. Large fish swam placidly beneath the surface of the lake. They were bigger than fish caught in the wild. No lizard man would believe that they had been raised from fry. Well, nobody except for Zaryusu's elder brother and his sister-in-law. You did good, Zaryusu. Shisuria murmured his praise as he looked on the same scenery as his younger brother. His voice contained undertones of various emotions blending together. It's all thanks to you, Anija. His younger brother's reply was colored with similar complexity. Mew, what did I do? Indeed, his brother, Shisuria, had not done anything to help. However, that was only in reference to taking direct action. Whenever anything had happened to the fish, a priest would immediately show up. Many people had come to help him collect materials to weave the nets. And when the tribesmen brought fish back to share, they would give him the healthiest fish. Meanwhile, the hunters had delivered fruits for use as feed. All of these helpers adamantly refused to reveal the identity of the person who had sent them, but no matter how stupid Zaryusa was, he could tell who had asked them to give him a hand, as well as the fact that said person did not wish to make his identity known. That was because a tribal chief helping someone who had separated himself from the tribe was very inappropriate. Anija, when the fish get bigger, I'll make sure you're first in line to get one. Oh, I'll look forward to that. Shisuria turned to walk away, and then he quietly said, I'm sorry. What are you saying, Anija? After all, you did nothing wrong. He did not know if Shisuria had heard those words. All Zaryusu could do was watch silently as his elder brother left, walking along the lake's shore. After inspecting the conditions at the fish farm, Zaryusu returned to the village. Then, a strange hunch made him suddenly look to the sky. There was nothing unusual there. The only thing he could see in the clear blue sky were the cloud-wreathed peaks to the north. In other words, the scenery was perfectly normal. There was nothing unusual there. Just as he wondered if he might be imagining things, he noticed a strange cloud in the sky. At the same time, thick clouds which blotted out the sun suddenly appeared over the center of the village. They were so dense and widespread that they plunged the entire village into darkness. Shocked, everyone looked to the sky. The priests had said that today would be sunny. Their weather predictions were quite accurate, being that they were based on magic and knowledge gained over long years of experience. Thus, it was quite a surprise that their weather forecast had turned out wrong. However, the strange thing was that there were no clouds in the sky except in the air directly above the village. It was as though someone had summoned those clouds into being there. This strange scene continued to play out. The clouds began revolving around the village, and as they did, they spread out to cover a wider area. It was as though the sky was being rapidly eaten away by these mysterious clouds. This was highly unusual. The lizardman warriors hurriedly prepared for battle. They children fled into the houses. Zariusa lowered his stance and glanced around himself, one hand closing around Frostpane's hilt. The dark clouds now filled the air overhead, but in the distance one could still see the blue sky. The clouds only covered the village. It was at this moment that he heard a sound made by lizardmen, which came from the center of the village. It was a shrill piping carried on the wind. It was a warning. It warned of a powerful enemy, and the need to flee right away. As he heard the warning, Zariusu immediately began running through the marshes, at what passed for a sprint among lizardmen. He ran and he ran and he ran some more. While it was hard to sprint in the wetlands, Zariusu kept his balance by shifting his tail's position. With a speed no human being could attain, granted, lizardmen were better suited for this terrain, he reached the place from which the warning had come. Zariusu and the warriors formed a circle that looked at the center of the village. His eyes followed theirs, and soon he was staring as well. Their many lines of sight converged on one place, a monster which resembled a cloud of roiling black mist. Countless dreadful, ever-changing faces emerged from within the mist. The faces belonged to many races and species, but the one thing they all had in common was the fact that they all bore agonized expressions. The wind carried the sounds of weeping, cries of agony, the gnashing of teeth, and the last gasps of the dying to them. The endless tide of spine-chilling noise made Zariusa shiver in fear. This is bad. We should let the others flee so Anija, and I can take care of this. But if we do that, Zariusa was easily one of the top combatants among the scattered tribes, and yet even he was afraid of the powerful undead being before him. Right now, the only people who could hold their own against this sort of opponent were probably himself and his elder brother. The most important thing was that Zariusa still did not know what special abilities that undead creature possessed. Glancing around, he noticed that all the warrior lizard men